1. To start. It was around 9:30 at night, and my husband and I have an English bulldog that desperately demanded to go outside. So we just grabbed our phones, clean-up supplies, and set out walking her around our apartment complex, for her to do her business. The first leg of walking her around went perfectly normal. Then as we reached a stop sign in the parking lot, we noticed a couple of headlights behind us. We immediately walked to the side of the road, just out of the way of the stop sign to permit the car to pass us, since we didn't want our dog being spooked by their vehicle. She's fairly skittish and will dart off if she's scared. This was the first sign of trouble. Instead of pulling past us, the car stopped beside us. The driver rolled down his window and there was a short pause. I remember that I instinctively had a bad vibe about this. The first was because if they were lost, had a question or anything of that nature, then they would have immediately spoken as soon as they rolled the window down. The second was that I caught a glimpse of two people in a vehicle, a male driver and female passenger. I didn't get a good look at their features, but what set me off was their intense focus on me. They didn't address my husband or so much as look at him. At that point, I did something I used to do in college if I felt uneasy. The parking lot is open, and we were right by one of the many dog parks with parking spaces surrounding its fence line. So I walked over by the fence and used the parked vehicles as my physical barrier between us and this car. My husband followed after me with the dog. By this point, I just sort of thought that maybe I was overreacting, but I wasn't going to stop to find out. Then they started following us. They didn't pull past us or call out. They just left the window down and kept driving forward and stopping to keep pace with us. Those parked cars were our saving grace at that point. Once my husband and I realized that, oh shit, this is actually happening, we had rounded towards the front of the complex. The mailbox area is open, but just behind that is a network of pathways that snake between buildings. This complex was built in the 1970s, so there isn't much uniformity among the building locations or walkways. This was another advantage for us. So my husband and I made a quick run behind one of the buildings and started trying to make our way through those walkways. There are a couple of periodic breaks where the path becomes visible between buildings, and every time we reached one of those breaks, those people were right there. I think it had happened about 3 times before we were able to get the walkway just behind our building and circle around to avoid them seeing which one we lived in specifically. At this point, they'd driven to the far side of the parking lot, looking like they were searching for us, but because of how we'd wound through the final stretch of those paths, they could no longer find us. We did call the police after we made it inside to report suspicious activity. They didn't give us any information afterwards, but there's been a steady increase in police presence in our area since then. I have no doubt in my mind that they had ill intentions. What gets me was their brazenness in this entire ordeal. I wasn't alone. I had both my husband, 5'7", 185 pounds, and my English bulldog with me. To add even more confusion, I'm not really winning any beauty pageants myself. 5'2", pushing 180 pounds. I'm not really someone that gets picked out of the crowd. I do believe 100% that this was an attempt at a crime of opportunity. I don't think this couple had much experience at all, otherwise they probably would have tried lowering our guard first before following us around. In the end, that inexperience and suspicious behavior was what tipped us off. 2. This story extends from 8th grade middle school to my freshman year in college. I'm 24 now, so this must have begun in 2008. I was raised in a Korean household with strong Christian beliefs. Every summer and winter there would be a youth retreat where all the teens in our church would go on one big joint retreat with counselors and teenagers from churches in and out of state. I met my best friend Hannah there. She was from Philly and had a pastor there who was white who we called Pastor Allen. I'm only stating that he's white because it ties into his weird fetish. Plus these retreats were predominantly Korean. After these retreats, everyone would add each other on Facebook and keep in touch. I remember a day or two after the 2008 summer retreat, Pastor Allen would often reach out and ask how my walk with God was going since the retreat, and if I ever need to see someone to speak to, I could always confide in him. This didn't alarm me at the time because counselors would keep in touch all the time. I always kept our conversations brief considering the fact that I was shy and timid. Over the years, I'd always see Pastor Allen at retreats and was friendly with him. Nothing strange happened other than his persistence in keeping in touch with me on Facebook after retreats. I slowly stopped talking to him and eventually we didn't speak at all. This is where it all starts to get weird. One day after our summer retreat in 2011, I got a friend request from a woman named Sumiko. I noticed we had a lot of mutual friends from the retreat, so I assumed she was a counselor there. She messaged me immediately after I accepted the request. Her and I became quickly acquainted. At the time I was 15, and she was everything I needed in an older sister. Although we never met, I let my naivete get to me and confided in her about my teenage girl troubles. After months in, I remember walking into church and asking one of my youth leaders if they met a Sumiko at the retreat. He said he never heard of her. I asked him if he could check the roster, and he did, only to find out there was no Sumiko on the list. That's when things started to get super eerie for me. I panicked and went home to block Sumi off my Facebook. I saw on her page that the only person who continued to tell her it was nice seeing her was Pastor Allen. No one else from the retreat seemed to really be interacting with her. It all started to freak me out. I blocked her and unfriended Pastor Allen. I remember no longer attending these church retreats. A few days later I received an email telling me that Sumiko decided to attempt suicide because of me, and that the email is coming from the mental hospital she was staying at. They told me it was all my fault. I was a junior in high school under high amounts of stress from SATs, and I deleted the email because I just wanted to forget about it all and focus on studying. Shortly after, I started to receive really unfriendly anonymous messages on my Tumblr. They would tell me that I was going to burn in hell for eternity if I continued to stray from God. They continued all the way up into my senior year in high school. I always deleted and ignored them, or I'd reply sarcastically and laugh at them with my friends. Eventually, the messages faded and I didn't hear much from them anymore. In 2012, I got accepted to a close-by Christian college and I moved into my dorm. My dorm floor decided to have a little icebreaker meeting to help us get comfortable. I met another Korean girl and we began talking about our similarities in our childhood, being raised Korean with Christian parents. I opened up to her about my encounter with Pastor Allen, and midway through this story I saw her face slowly dropping and getting pale. She told me that she had a very similar encounter with a pastor she knew, and that he was also a white man working with the youth in an all-Korean church. I asked where she was from, and she replied with the same state that Pastor Allen was from. She then asked me if the name of the pastor was Pastor Allen. We had the same predator in our lives at the same age. I'm not sure where Pastor Allen is now, but I pray to God that he has not harmed any little Korean girls. It's absolutely disgusting. He was borderline 60 years old when I was 14 or 15. It makes me sick knowing people prey on children in the most vulnerable ways. It ruined a lot about my perspective on Christianity as well. It's horrible to take something so spiritual and take advantage of a child with it. So Pastor Allen, with a creepy young Asian girl fetish, let's not meet ever again. 3. I'm an 18-year-old male who looks like a 13 or 14-year-old male. Since I have suffered from pretty bad hormonal imbalances, which have been treated only during the past 2 years, and only the last year have been almost successfully dealt with. This happened to me in May at the bus stop in front of my school. Now, the school is in a city, not in the countryside, so the bus stop is not reachable by simply crossing the street, unless you want to get yourself smashed on the road. You have to take a longer path that goes all the way up to the roundabout, where there are some crosswalks in order to reach the other side of the road. This is important because I could have just tried to run back to my school without putting up a fight. It was like 2 p.m. after school, and I was waiting for the bus with a classmate who happens to live near the train station where I take my ride home. I don't live in the city. We are miraculously occupying the only 2 seats on the bench at the stop. They are almost always occupied by the elderly. chit-chatting about my cubes and new puzzles that I was afraid were never going to make it to Italy. I'm a cuber, and I need to order my puzzles from America or China, when I hear this voice on my right side. Now, I am used to being attacked and harassed at least twice a year. Something in the way I portray myself, I suppose, makes others believe I am a doormat, when actually I am a sneaky little bastard. And I usually pay a lot of attention to people who tend to sit and stand close to me without a real reason. But that day, feeling exhausted, end of the school year equals a ton of stress, and being sat down, both contributed to me lowering my guard. Huge mistake on my part, I know, but it was at rush hour, and I really thought I just wanted to get home and go to sleep. I suffer from depression, which makes me almost always pretty exhausted. So this voice said, "What the fuck did you do on your arm, kiddo? Did you self-harm?" And I was slowly realizing that A, he was a grown-up, not some stupid teenager, talking to me in a very aggressive manner. Surely not concerned at all about my well-being, rudely interrupting my friend who was in the middle of a sentence to, basically, scream to the world that I self-harm. And all that without knowing me, and B, troubles were about to begin. So I instinctively decided that a very rude answer might work as a way of saying, "I am not easy prey, go look for someone else." And I stared deeply into his eyes and told him to fuck off. At this point, I was carefully pondering whether it would be better or worse for me to get up from the bench in case he started a fight. What he did next caught me completely off guard, I have to admit it. He smiled at me with an evil grin on his face. His teeth were yellowish, but what really gave me one of the worst cases of heebie-jeebies I've ever had were his eyes. They were the pit of madness. After a second or so, that of course felt like an eternity, he placed himself right in front of me, yelling that nowadays there is no respect for elders, and that we, students, beat up our teachers. The day before in Italy, a student had actually done that to one of his teachers, and that he would give me a lesson. I was now standing on my feet, deciding that I really needed to get some advantage, and that what he wanted was to pick a fight, and no matter how I reacted, he would eventually start punching me to get me to defend myself. And the same moment these thoughts rushed through my mind, he started to lift his arms in a wrestling position. So I decided I may as well strike first to get a slight advantage. I didn't want to punch him too bad in case he was a masochist projecting his issues on me. I've learned thanks to my religion teacher, who gives us lectures of our choice, which in the first semester happened to be psychology, that a possible defensive strategy for one's mind, not to face the truth, could be projecting their problems onto others. And I obviously didn't plan on feeding his appetite for pain. But even though I hadn't stricken too hard, he probably felt like he had finally got me playing his sick game, and therefore proceeded to kick me, not as hard as I knew he could have, if he had actually wanted to hurt me. In those instants, I felt pity for him, and also the situation reminded me a lot of a very poorly written tragicomedy, which I actually found pretty funny in its own twisted way. By now my friend has started to yell, "Stop it, the both of you!" and actually try to put herself between us, which prevented us from fighting for a few moments, before he decided he was going to get what he wanted. The next thing he did, I wasn't ready to deal with. I need my glasses more than I needed to eat, honestly. Because I am a self-defined first-class myopic, well, not really first class, but almost. It's a work in progress that I hope has finally almost come to a halt, and well, slapping me on the face, sending my glasses who knows where, was probably the best thing he could have done. I couldn't even see the next punch and kick landing, so I fell on my hands and knees, instinctively raising my arms above my head to shield myself. My friend had now understood that our only hope was that the bus would arrive and we could finally flee from the battle. I forgot to mention that the bus stop was literally full of people, 30 at the very least. But I am by now used to what I call the dairy behavior. Nobody was going to do anything to help us. And I was later told that there was even a guy laughing and pointing his stupid cell phone camera at me, to have some great video to share with his like-minded deranged friends. I later tried to Google it, but to this day I haven't been able to find it. My mom even pointed out the unlikely but creepy possibility that it was all a put-up job to get a video of a fight. Unlikely, since this guy was very young and of color, and the man was a middle-aged wreck who probably also happened to be a racist. My friend knew she wasn't capable of actively trying to stop him and that she would just freeze. She later confessed to me that it was the first time she was involved in a fight, which I found a bit odd, having had to deal myself with this situation at least 6 or 7 times before this one. So she did the only thing she could do to help me defend myself better, which was locating and giving me back my glasses as soon as possible, which of course had unfortunately broke, and now only had one lens left. I put them on anyway, getting ready for my next round, but just as the madman threw another punch that I never felt landing, a gentleman in his 70s, whom I luckily found at the same stop 2 weeks later and thanked profusely, had put himself as a barrier between me and the madman, trying to talk him out of his psycho outbreak in a patronizing tone. At the same time, our freaking bus finally arrived and we basically jumped inside it. I was later told that the madman kept rambling complete nonsense about young people all being criminals whilst he left the stop. Still clearly upset for not getting what he was looking for. He had obviously never come to the bus stop to catch a bus, but with the intention of picking up a fight. The disturbing thing is that my scars are on my left arm, which I am pretty sure was not visible from my right side, where he was standing at the beginning, so I often find myself wondering whether it was his lucky day to find someone with scars at the bus stop, or if he had noted me somewhere else, then proceeded to stalk me in order to get the perfect situation for his personal amusement. This latter hypothesis bugs me a lot because even though I haven't seen him since, I think of how many freaks we encounter in our lives and pass unobserved under our radars. I obviously decided that the next Thursday I wouldn't take the same bus at the same stop, but what happened was that I didn't even have to go to school that day, because I was having my umpteenth cold for the season with a fever and all of that unpleasant stuff. Best guess is that since there are a number of hospitals in that city, he probably escaped or was dismissed from a psych ward. I also suppose it is plausible that he was high on drugs. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 383. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their story in this video. Well, I had actually not a bad weekend. I mentioned I was having a bit of trouble relaxing, and I managed to relax quite well on the Friday. Kind of on the Friday, I had a few errands to run. Not bad on the Saturday, and Sunday, well, I was quite busy on Sunday. I had a few things to do. The last thing I had to do, apart from artwork for the walls in my bedroom, I haven't got that yet, but I'll probably get that this month sometime. I'll find things I like. The last thing I had to do was put up blinds, new curtains, and a curtain rod, and I finally got all the bits and pieces I need this weekend. So I did that. Got an excuse to play with my drill again, so very important manly work, of course. So I popped that up. Didn't take too long, although I did take a little bit of a tumble and ended up falling flat on my face, which was delightful. Thankfully, nothing broken. A couple of bruises on my legs, but I'm alright, I'll be fine. And even managed to find the time to borrow my sister's carpet cleaner and give the carpets a clean. So they look quite nice. And yes, I made sure to take a few minutes to pet the dog before I left my sister's house. He's very insistent. It used to be he'd run away from you, or you get a brief amount of contact. Now it's a matter of, as soon as he sees you enter the house, he sits in front of you and he goes, "Right, time for pets. You're not going anywhere till I get my pets." And then it's just the rules. So I'm happy to say, with all that, the house is looking not bad. A couple of things it could do with getting tidied up, but it's not really that messy. It's basically a 5-minute tidy job. Oh, what I also discovered at the weekend there was, well, I didn't discover this, I've played it before. It's Google Earth VR, right, so in virtual reality. And the interesting thing about that is, you've got like the Google Street View, right? You can use that with the headset, and it's fairly immersive, but it doesn't look quite perfect. But you can also do the thing where you go down into the map, and it's not quite Street View, but what they've done is it's a combination of, I guess, satellite imagery and the images from the Google car. I'm guessing that's where they got the source from, and they extrapolate a 3D version of the environment, right? Now, last time I used this, they hadn't gotten so far as my town. I guess they must be continually expanding it, because now they've actually done my town, like the whole of it. So that's interesting. Been able to put on the VR headset, then basically stand in your street, but it looks like a badly iced cake, like the buildings and everything. And it's a kind of weird feeling where it's so familiar feeling, because the depth and distance and scale and everything, that's very close to reality. It's just everything's kind of slightly malformed. So that's weird, because your brain and your body knows what to expect there. And it's getting a lot of it, but it's also kind of off. Or maybe kind of like the bizarro world version of your town. And so that was interesting to see. It's also kind of fun to be able to fly around, because you can fly in Google Earth. If you got VR, you can fly around your hometown, like over the buildings and the backyards and everything. And it's weird, because I actually managed to go not only to my street, but I managed to go into the front garden, and even up as far as my front door, because I've got these huge trees in my front yard, and in my front garden, and they because it's not fully detailed, whereas the trees are kind of malformed to the point where it looks like they're just kind of two green blobs right next to each other, whereas there's actually a passageway in between them, so you can get to the front door, and quite an easily accessible passageway. So that was kind of weird to look at, and a lot of fun as well. So I'd imagine they'll continue to improve that, and it'll get more and more detailed as time goes on. I mean, that's in about a year. That happened since I got my... I think I got my HTC Vive last year it was, so I've had it just over a year now. So yeah, be fun to see where they take it. Now I know what you're thinking, but well, you live there, you can just go outside. It is, but it's also fun to see how they do these things. So that's great. Anyway, with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.